concerning blasphemy in general, and the rites of Eleusis in particular, by Aleister Crowley. Pioneers, oh pioneers. Whenever it occurs to anyone to cut a new canal of any kind, he will be well advised to look out for trouble. If it be the Isthmus of Suez, the simple-minded engineer is apt to imagine that it is only a question of shifting so much sand, but before he can so much as strike the first pickaxe into the earth, he finds that he is up against all kinds of interests, social, political, financial, and whatnot. The same applies to the digging of canals in the human brain. When Simpson introduced chloroform, he thought it a matter for the physician and found himself attacked from the pulpit. All his arguments proved useless, and we should probably be without chloroform today if some genius had not befriended him by discovering that God caused Adam to fall into a deep sleep before he removed the rib of which Eve was made. Now, chloroform was something that used to be in a lot of medications. The abuse of the gutter. Nowadays, a movement has to be very well on the way to success before it is attacked by any responsible people. The first trouble comes from the gutter. Now, the language of the gutter consists chiefly of meaningless abuse, and the principal catchwords coming, as they do, from the mouths of men who never opened them without a profane oath or a foul allusion, are those of blasphemy and immorality. The charge of insanity is frequently added when the new idea is just sufficiently easy to understand a little. There is another reason too. For these three particular cries, these are the charges which, if proved, can get the person into trouble, and at the same time, which are in a sense true of everybody. For they all refer to a more or less arbitrary standard of normality. The old cry of heresy has naturally lost much of its force. In a country 9/10 of whose population are admittedly heretics, but immorality and insanity are today almost equally meaningless terms. The censor permits musical comedy and forbids Oedipus Rex, and Mr. Bernard Shaw brands the censor as immoral for doing so. Most people of the educated classes will probably agree with him. Now, ways to break through the control mechanisms include swearing, lying, and drug use. And of course, along with that, you can put blasphemy somewhere, right? Insanity and blasphemy. As for insanity, it is simply a question of finding a Greek or Latin name for any given act. If I open the window, it is on account of claustrophobia. When I shut it again, it is an attack of agoraphobia. All the professors tell me that every form of emotion has its root in sex. Well, Freud is proven wrong in a bunch of stuff, and describe my fondness for pictures as if it were a peculiarly unnatural type of vice. It is even impossible for an architect to build a church spire without being told that he is revering the worship of Priapus. Well, it's a violation of, I forget which verse in the Bible, but you're not supposed to do it according to the Bible. Now, the only result of all this is that all these terms of abuse have become entirely meaningless. Save as defined by law, there is still some meaning in the term forger as used in general speech, but only because it has not yet occurred to any wiseacre to prove that all his political and religious opponents are forgers. This seems to me a pity. There is undoubtedly a forged passage in Tacitus and another in Petronius. Everyone who studies the classics is therefore a kind of accomplice in forgery. The charge of blasphemy is in all cases a particularly senseless one. It has been hurled in turn at Socrates, Euripides, Christ, El Mansur, the Bab, and the Reverend R.J. Campbell. Now, there's a lot of pseudo-epigraphical works, right? But of course, there's a difference between blasphemy and just believing something different, right? The morality, red herring. Legal blasphemy is, of course, an entirely different thing. In the recent notorious case where an agent of the Rationalist Press Association, Harry Bolter by name, was prosecuted, the question proved to be not a theological one at all. It was really this: were the neighbors being annoyed? Was the man's language coarse? And the judge and Joseph McCabe agreed that it was. But in modern times, no one has ever been prosecuted in any civilized country for stating philosophic propositions. Well, I think that's the definition of civilization, is they've gone too far in their laws, right? Whatever may be their theological implications, we have no longer the casuists of the Inquisition who would take the trouble to argue from Bruno's propositions of immanence of God that if that were so, the doctrine of the incarnation was untenable, and therefore he shall be burned. It is only the very narrowest religious sects that trouble to call Fort Spencer an atheist. What the man in the street means by atheist is the militant atheist, Bradlaugh or Foot, and it is a singular characteristic of the odium theologicum that instead of arguing soberly concerning the proposition which those worthies put forward, they always try to drag the red herring morality across the track. Of all the stupid lies men have ever invented, nothing is much sillier than the lie that one who does not believe in God must be equally a disbeliever in morality. As a matter of fact, in a country which pretends so hard to appear theistic as England, it requires the most astounding moral courage, a positive galaxy of virtues, for a man to stand up and say that he does not believe in God, as Dr. Waits historically remarked. It ought to be unpleasant for a man to say that he does not believe in Jesus. And my dislike to atheism is principally founded on the fact that so many of its exponents are always boring me about ethics. Some priceless idiot who, I hope, will finish in the British Museum remarked in a free-thinking paper the other day that they need not trouble to put down the churches because they will always be so useful for sane and serious discussion of important ethical problems. Personally, I would rather go back to the times when the preacher preached by the hourglass. And it's important they have a sense of what time is going by, right? And nowadays people complain that in Europe and America, Islam is the most practiced religion. It's like, well, practice your own religion, right? The pot and the kettle. I have always been very amused too in this connection of blasphemy by the refusal of Christian missionary journals on which I was largely brought up. They are full from cover to cover of the most scandalous falsehoods about heathen gods. Well, heathens and pagan isn't really, it's a cultural, it's a material culture term. It's not a theological thing really, but it was misused as like an insult. So calling people pagan and heathen, that's a sort of blasphemy in itself if you're referring to the religious grouping. And the most senseless insults to them, insults penned by the grossly ignorant of our religious population. It is only in recent years that the English public have discovered that Buddha was not a god. And it was not the missionaries that found this out, but scholars of secular attainment. In America, particularly, the most incredible falsehoods are constantly circulated by the missionary societies, even about the customs of the Hindus. To read them, one would suppose that every crocodile in India was fed with babies as the first religious duty of every Indian mother. But, of course, it is most terribly wicked for the Hindu to make fun of the deities of the American. For my part, who have lived half my life in Christian countries and half my life in heathen countries, I cannot see much to choose between the different religions. Their arguments consist, in the end, of passionate assertion, which is no argument at all. Yeah, people saying, "Oh, I believe this, and you believe this, so you better believe my way." You know, that's largely what people have, right? Religion and draw poker. There is an excellent story, much better known in India than in England, of a missionary who was explaining to the poor heathen how useless were his gods. "See," said he, "I insult your idol, but he is but of dead stone. He does not avenge himself or punish me." "I insult your God," replied the Hindu. "He is invisible. He does not avenge himself or punish me." "Ah," said the missionary, "my God will punish you when you die." And the poor Hindu could only find the following pitiable answer: "So when you die, will my idol punish you?" It was from America, too, that I have attained the first principle of religion, which is that four to a flush are not as good as one small pair. Orgies. Still, I suppose, it is useless to contest the popular view that anyone whom any fool chooses to call an atheist is liable to conduct orgies. Now, can anyone tell me what orgies are? No. Then I must reach down the lexicon. Orgia, only used in the plural and connected with ergon, work, means sacred rites, sacred worship practiced by the initiated at the sacred worship of Demeter at Eleusis, and also the rites of Bacchus. It also means any rites or worship or sacrifice of any mysteries without any reverence to religion. And orgasio means, therefore, to celebrate orgies or ceremonies or to celebrate any sacred rites. It is really a poor comment on the celebration of sacred rites that the word should have come to mean something entirely different as it does today. For the man in the street, orgy means a wild revel, usually accompanied by drunkenness. I think it is almost time that somebody took the word orgy as a battle cry, and having shown that the Eucharist is only one kind of orgy, to restore the true euphemism, which is not of an alcoholic or sexual nature, among the laity. For it is no secret that the falling away of all nations from religion, which only a few blind worms are fatuous enough to deny, is due to the fact that the fire no longer burns in the sacred lamp. Well, electric lights probably have had some sort of change, but you can use electric lights just the same way you would use candles and oil and stuff like this as ritual light. Outside a few monasteries, there is hardly any church of any sect whose members really expect anything to happen to them from attending public worship. If a new St. Paul were to journey to Damascus, the doctor would be called in and his heavenly vision diagnosed as epilepsy. If a new Muhammad came from his cave and announced himself a messenger of God, he would be thought a harmless lunatic. And that is the first stage of a religious propaganda. And that's one of the problems, is the experience of religion has gone away. And it seems to be nowadays that people are practically turning to Satanism because that offers an experience for the whole thing. The Satan's cross. Now, the real messenger of God can always be distinguished in a very simple way. He possesses a mysterious force which enables him to persist, heedless of the sneers and laughter of the populace. It then strikes the wiser people that he is dangerous, and they begin on the blasphemy and immorality. In the life of our Lord, this will be noticed. In the first place, there was just the contemptuous to us. He hath a devil, which was the equivalent of he's just a crank. But when it was found that this crank had adherents, men of force and eloquence like Peter, to say nothing of financial genius like Judas Iscariot, the cry was quickly changed into wild accusations of blasphemy and allegations of immorality. Nowadays, we'd say the son of Hamas instead of the Judas Iscariot, right? And that comes from the word for resistance. He's a friend of publicans and sinners. A sane government only laughs at these ebullitions. And it is then the task of the Pharisees to prove to the government that it is to its interest to suppress this dangerous upstart. They may succeed, and though the government is never for a moment blind to the fact that it is doing an injustice, the new Savior is crucified. It is this final publicity of crucifixion for advertisement is just as necessary in one age as another, that secures the full triumph to him whom his enemies fondly suppose to be their victim. Such is human blindness, that the messenger himself, his enemies, and the civil power, all of them do exactly the one thing which we will defeat, their ends. The messenger would never succeed at all if it were not that he is the messenger, and it really matters very little what steps he may take to get the message delivered, for all concerned are but pawns in the great game played by the infinite wisdom and infinite power. Orderly, decorous ceremonies. It is therefore a negligible matter, this abuse, from whatever source it comes. It should waste my time if I were to prove that the rites of Eleusis, as now being performed at Paxton Hall, are orderly, decorous ceremonies. It is true that at times darkness prevails. So it does in some of Wagner's operas, and in certain ceremonies of a mystical character, which will occur to the minds of a larger section of my male readers. There are, moreover, periods of profound silence, and I can quite understand that in such an age of talk as this, that seems a very suspicious circumstance. Now, people will treat things as blasphemous, not even knowing their own religion, right? The Bible talks, there's this word, salah, and almost no Christian will do anything resembling a salah. There are Jews that will do stuff resembling that, but people will act like their conservative rituals are of their group are, it. Or they'll pretend that things are like of no thing whatsoever, or that you're not supposed to try to get into things sensually and emotionally. And to be direct about one's faith, people treat that as if it's blasphemous. And some people, they have to break free. I was part of a group that they had, I mean, I never went to Minnesota to do it, but they had something that was basically the equivalent of the Stations of the Cross thing. And they basically put their leader as like some sort of thing, right? And sometimes, you know, we can turn the sense, okay, they're real victims, but you don't identify as a victim. And people like, they like to see you as whatever, but you can actually feed off people's thing, right? And there's a difference between immorality and having your own morality. Because is it impossible to be amoral? Perhaps it's impossible to be amoral. Definitely you can be immoral because you can go against the morality, but then again, you can not care about the morality. But if you have your own principles, and it is morality. So that's a tricky one, right? And one of the things about the ceremonies, the various attachments, right? It's important to know what is really there and what isn't, right? What is really necessarily part of it, and what you can leave or take, right? And what shouldn't be there at all. And sometimes the shouldn't will have its effect, but it's better to be, say you can be better directly on your own thing. And yeah, people, they need their experience of their faith in this life, other than just, oh, well, I went to a building and I talked to some people afterwards. And we need better arguments than just psychological threats. Hinduism is not one religion, it's a whole series of different faiths, monotheism to polytheism, all sorts of ethics. So it's, you know, it's hard to narrow down some of that stuff. And Satanism is the same way. It's a variety of beliefs and practices, or a lack of beliefs and practices in certain areas. And sometimes it's better to just, you know, if you don't know, generally stay quiet. You can think of possibilities for things in life, but you know, and some people, their faith gets in the way. It gets in the way of actually having principles, actually accomplishing things, actually developing their own thing. And whether something's opening up or closing up, you know, you just got to be, you got to think of the situation. And if you think of some of the situations in the myths, like that first part that we look at, we're going to find out things in the material world and uses for things in the material world that if we just, you know, and censorship is, you know, it shouldn't just be something based on whether we like something or not.